The current situation in Ecuador, we're joined by political analyst Jayson J. Smart. Good evening, Jason.
It's good evening, Jonas.
So we reached you in Ecuador, and the crisis in Ecuador has reached its new heights as President Guillermo Lasso to evade accusations in the trial of an alleged embezzlement involving some national and private oil companies. But is this the only reason why Ecuadorians have had enough of the president?
I think that the reality is that the entire accusation of theft or theft from government resources is less important than the overall situation. Crime in Ecuador has reached a historically bad point. Every day there's murders of multiple people in the major cities. And it's largely tied to the narco trafficking, the gangs, and related issues. And so there's about 8% public support for Guillermo Lasso, who came to power a year ago already, which shows that the population just completely opposes him. So whatever the reason is that it is officially there, which is theft of government resources, is less important to the average person than the fact that they find it intolerable to continue living in a country that is simply too dangerous to live a normal daily life.
Mm-hmm. Well, impeachment for President Lasso was on its way, but instead of facing impeachment, Ecuadorian president launched a mutual death procedure. Now, what is this muerte cruzada scheme?
So the muerte cruzada scheme is this. It's the mutual cancellation. So by canceling the parliament, the Assembly Nacional, the National Assembly, this means that he can do that. He can throw them all out of office. But the impact of that is there must be new elections for the president as well as the parliament within 180 days or 160 days. And so in this case, it looks like there will be elections in a few months. Until then, since the parliament is no longer functioning, he will be sort of the sole leader of the country. In this period of time, you'll see that there's going to be a very active, very robust campaign, I think, against him. And the fact is that the major political parties in the country have consolidated quite a bit due to some of the historic parties, including Lasso's own, sort of dying out due to his huge unpopularity, and the rise of an X-party, which was headed by a guy named Rafael Correa, and his center-left political party is most likely to win in the new set of elections.
Right. But is Ecuador about to face total chaos now? I mean, on one hand, we have the military firmly supporting Lasso, but on the other hand, it seems that, as we already stated, the vast part of the society is willing to protest him staying in the office. So is there a threat that there will be some protests which can effectively paralyze Ecuador?
Most certainly. I mean, Ecuador has historically had massive protests, especially involving the indigenous communities that go to Quito, the capital, and try to take control, or at least try to force out the leader. And it looks like in this case, that's probably not going to happen in the sense that there's already dissolved the parliament. He's already put into motion the steps that will lead to new elections. But in the meantime, there was yesterday, just next to the presidential palace, about 25,000 people next to Karen Delet. Well, it's the name of the presidential palace. And this is a significant step, and that's unusual for Ecuador. And the fact is that there is, as I said, a high degree of insecurity. That feels that the economy is worsening, and people are very unsatisfied. For a president who came to power with about 55% of the vote in the runoff elections last year, or 2 years ago, he's now down to only about 8% support. That's phenomenally bad. And it's going to be very difficult for him to maintain order in the country, especially that he's combating not only his own domestic population is dissatisfied, but narco traffickers who are working with, as was well documented, foreign allies, including Russia, by the way, which washes money with such organizations.
Right. But what will happen after these 6 months of Lasso's rule? Now, will President face finally charges then, or will he be capable now of maybe issuing some new regulations, a new law which would help him to avoid facing justice in the end?
Well, that's exactly the thing, is that since he has 6 months to essentially a free hand to do whatever he pleases, there is a chance, a low probability, because it seems that he's sort of inept and incapable of really doing anything significant. But if he were to make a decision he could force through a number of laws very quickly, or executive orders really, to decide that we have to make immediate decisions to change the economy, to improve the economy. He already did that actually today. The first executive order he signed after his dissolving the parliament was about changing the tax system and how it was going to collect taxes in the future. And there's a chance that he can push through a number of other very populistic initiatives quickly to increase his own popularity. But there's also a risk that he could become, it's a very non-democratic situation, as there's only a president, that he could sort of use the political axis of, say, the prosecutor's office and the military to suppress democratic opposition.
I see. Now, I read that one of his most, that indigenous Ecuadorians are very much against Guillermo Lasso. But why is it so? Why exactly these people?
Guillermo Lasso is a center-right political figure who was formerly the head of a bank. In Latin America, the general sense, especially amongst leftists, is that bankers are sort of in collusion to deprive the poor people of everything. They do offer they offer a lot of different loans, for instance, which have interest rates that historically incremented quickly, which should eventually bankrupt the people who got them, but the bank would extract as much finance as they could from them in the meantime. And so they have a very negative reputation that goes back decades and decades. And the indigenous population has historically voted for more left-leaning political parties. In the case of Ecuador, one is Pachakutik, which is just an indigenous party. And it's something that has always had a significant part of the Ecuadorian vote. But in this case, they viewed Guillermo Lasso as being completely uninterested in their concerns or in their needs, and being more focused on simply the needs and the desires of the wealthiest class, which sort of lives like Miami in comparison to the rest of Ecuador.
Right. So who in the end will most likely rule the country after Lasso's gone? Because you mentioned the opposition parties. Now we're talking about the indigenous party. But is there a strong, clear leader of the opposition?
Yes, there is a very strong leadership of the opposition. There is the most significant by far. Just won local elections a couple months ago, which was led by the former president, Rafael Correa, who is left-leaning, was tied to Evo Morales, for instance, was tied to various other leftist leaders like Lula in Brazil. His political party just did enormous work in the past local elections, won a ton of the local seats, which they never historically had. And polling indicates that, well, publicly available polling indicates that there is a very good chance that they would win not only a majority in the parliament, but also presidential elections if they were held. And it's significant. Their former vice president, Jorge Glass, which was imprisoned for 6 years due to a scandal involving Brazil, actually, a Brazilian corporation, recently got out of prison, and the vast majority of the country at this point believes that he was put in prison illegally to suppress his chances of becoming the president. And his current polling shows that if he were to be put against Guillermo Lasso, put against any of the other major figures in the country, he would clearly win the presidential elections.
Mm-hmm. And how does the situation in Ecuador affect other countries of the region?
Well, it's significant for a lot of reasons. The most important reason that it will change things for the region is that the entire Latin America is going through another left shift we see again. We've seen the case of Brazil, as we just mentioned. We've seen the case of Argentina. We've seen the case of Ecuador. Latin America is shifting left once again. And where we see that as being important, I think, is that, one, it's going to force the United States, as one of the players, to commit more resources to the region in order to keep its influence. I think that's also important that these countries are countries that are probably not going to be as aligned with policies such as anti-narcotics things that the United States has always promoted. And the reason is simple. One, because they think that the farmers themselves benefit from the production of narcotics or the sale of it, but also because they think that the U.S.'s assistance is actually an attempt to spy on those countries. And so they've historically pushed away from that, which has the negative effect that actually increases the number of drugs being sold here, or the quantity of drugs being sold, and also the amount of violence occurring due to these drug gangs.
Right, but are Ecuadorians in fact leaving the unstable country? Are they fleeing the current situation in Ecuador and trying to make a living in the U.S., which you already mentioned?
Yes, there have been people leaving, and it's in fact become so bad in major cities that it is not uncommon that people in specifically northwest of the country, near the border, will around, let's say, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, return home and lock the doors and not leave the house for the rest of the day due to the threat of being killed in the streets. The narco gangs have a tendency of shaking them down for, let's say, $25 a month. Keep in mind, the minimum wage is perhaps $450 a month or so. So shaking down for $25 a month is significant, and they will just extract money from all these different local peasants. And that's become such a threat that people are unable to live normal, stable lives.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. So the main problem of Ecuador would be this huge crime wave. But is there any clear solution to to the systemic problem? Does anyone have, a good recipe how to get rid of crimes in Ecuador?
No, the problem is that it's going to be almost impossible to defeat in the near term. The reality is that the narco gangs have far more money than the country of Ecuador has. I mean, the United States cannot combat all of the narco that it has in its own country, and it has the most advanced intelligence services, most advanced law enforcement, and tons of money. But it cannot combat it. Ecuador alone will be totally unable to do so. This is an influx of a lot of things. It's becoming now a major producer of cocaine. It's also no longer just a transit point, but producer of cocaine, but also influx of refugees from places like Venezuela, namely, who are unemployed and looking for jobs. And taking out jobs such as being a hitman can be paid very little. I mean, less than $100 can have someone killed. And so how do you break that down, or how do you stop that from happening, is going to be something that's very complicated.
It will be complicated indeed. $100 to kill a person. Wow.
Less than, yeah.
That doesn't sound good. Political analyst Jayson J. Smart was our guest tonight. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you.
And thank